In the spring of 1727, in a modest room in Kensington, London, Isaac Newton should have closed his eyes for the final time. But he did not. The fever that gripped him, the pain that twisted through his aged body, the shallow breath that should have been his last, all of it passed like a storm moving beyond the horizon. And when the dawn came, soft and golden through the window, Newton opened his eyes once more, his pulse steady, his mind clear, and something had changed within the fabric of his being, something imperceptible, something that would carry him forward through centuries yet unborn. He was 84 years old, and he would remain 84 in appearance for decades, then centuries, then longer still, as the world transformed around him in ways he could never have predicted. The man who had unlocked the mathematics of motion, who had split light into its spectrum of colors, who had discovered gravity's invisible hand pulling the apple and the moon alike. This man would now witness the unfolding of time itself, would see his own laws tested and expanded and transcended, would watch as humanity reached toward the stars he had once mapped with such devotion. And so begins this journey, this long and winding path through history, as Isaac Newton, immortal and ever watchful, moves from the candlelit chambers of the Enlightenment into the electric glow of modernity, carrying with him the weight of his achievements, the shadows of his mistakes, and the endless, burning curiosity that had always defined him. The servants who attended him in those final expected hours whispered among themselves about the miraculous recovery, about how the old master seemed to revive as if touched by divine grace, and Newton heard their whispers and said nothing, for he had no explanation to offer them, no theory to account for what had happened within his own flesh and bone. In the days that followed, as his strength returned in ways that defied all medical understanding of the time, Newton began to conduct experiments upon himself, measuring his vital signs with the precision he had once applied to the motion of pendulums and the refraction of light through prisms. He documented every sensation, every anomaly, filling page after page with observations written in his careful hand, searching for patterns that might explain this impossible continuation of life. The physicians who examined him declared it a miracle, a divine intervention, and while Newton had always believed in the hand of God in natural affairs, he could not shake the feeling that there must be some natural principle at work, some law as yet undiscovered that governed the boundary between life and death, and that he had somehow, inexplicably, crossed back over that boundary when he should have remained on the other side. The first decades are strange, disorienting, filled with a quiet terror that Newton confides to no one. He watches his friends grow old and pass into memory. Edmund Halley, the astronomer who convinced him to publish the Principia, dies in 1742, and Newton stands at the grave, hands trembling, wondering if he too should have been claimed by time 15 years prior. He begins to understand what he has become, though he does not understand why, and this absence of explanation haunts him more deeply than the immortality itself. Newton, who demanded mathematical proof for every phenomenon, who refused to hypothesize without evidence, now inhabits a body that defies all natural law, and he has no equation to describe it. He retreats from public life slowly, carefully, allowing the world to believe he has died in seclusion, and he moves to the countryside, to a small cottage near Cambridge, where he can think and observe and remain hidden. The mid-18th century unfolds around him, the age of reason blooming, his own ideas spreading across Europe like seeds carried on the wind. He reads Voltaire's tributes to his work, and he feels both pride and a strange emptiness. For these are tributes to a ghost, to a man the world believes is gone. In the quiet hours before dawn, Newton returns to his old obsessions: alchemy, theology, the hidden structures of reality that mathematics alone could not capture. He had spent years, decades even, searching for the philosopher's stone, for the secret of transmutation, and now he wonders if his own body has become that secret, a living proof of something beyond the material, beyond the clockwork universe he himself had described. He fills notebook after notebook with observations of his own condition, measuring his pulse and temperature, testing his blood with the crude instruments available, searching for some physical marker of his transformation. But he finds nothing, only the ordinary signs of life continuing impossibly beyond its natural term. The loneliness begins to settle over him like a slow fog, and he realizes that he will never again know the comfort of aging alongside his peers, never share the common human journey toward decline and death. He walks through the streets of Cambridge late at night, observing the university that had once been his home, watching young scholars hurrying between libraries and laboratories, and he remembers his own youth with a clarity that seems to sharpen rather than fade with time. Every memory is preserved perfectly, as if his immortality has granted him not just endless life but perfect recollection, and he wonders if this too is part of the transformation, if his mind has been altered along with his body. He tests this theory by attempting to recall conversations from decades past, mathematical derivations he performed in his 20s, the exact sequence of experiments he conducted during the plague years when he fled to Woolsthorpe, and he finds that he can summon these memories with photographic precision, can relive them as if they were happening in the present moment. This gift, if it can be called a gift, becomes both a blessing and a curse, for he cannot forget anything, cannot let the past fade into comfortable abstraction, and every loss, every mistake, every moment of pain or regret remains vivid and immediate, as fresh as the day it occurred. By the 1780s, Newton has learned to move through the world like a shadow, adopting new identities, new names, slipping from town to town as the decades accumulate. He witnesses the birth of the Industrial Revolution, the great engines and mills rising across England, and he sees in them the mechanical principles he had articulated so long ago, now embodied in iron and steam. The young scientists and engineers of this new age idolize his memory, build upon his foundations, and Newton watches from the margins, anonymous and silent. He corresponds occasionally with scholars under pseudonyms, offering insights that seem impossibly prescient, and rumors begin to circulate of a mysterious genius who appears and disappears like a phantom. In 1789, he travels to France, drawn by reports of the Revolution, and he walks the streets of Paris as the old order collapses, as the cries for liberty and equality echo through the boulevards. Newton, who had served the English crown, who had been Master of the Royal Mint and Knight of the Realm, observes the beheading of Louis XVI with a complex mixture of horror and fascination. He had always believed in order, in the divine architecture of the cosmos, and yet here is chaos, human will asserting itself against centuries of tradition. He wonders if his own laws apply only to the heavens, if human society operates by different principles entirely, principles he never studied, never understood. And he remembers his own bitterness, his battles with Hooke and Leibniz, his jealousy and pride, and he sees in the violence of the revolution a reflection of the same forces that had driven him to such pettiness in his mortal years. He visits the Bastille shortly after its fall, walks through the empty cells, touches the cold stone walls, and he thinks about imprisonment, about how he too is imprisoned now, locked within a body that will not release him, confined to an existence that stretches endlessly before him with no terminus in sight. The revolutionary fervor swirling around him speaks of breaking chains, of liberation from tyranny. But Newton knows a different kind of bondage, one that cannot be broken by force or will, only endured with whatever grace he can muster. He spends months in Paris, observing the transformation of society, the rise of new institutions and the destruction of old ones, and he begins to understand that human history operates through cycles of creation and destruction, that progress is not linear but dialectical, moving through thesis and antithesis toward synthesis, and he wonders if this same pattern governs the development of scientific knowledge. If his own theories too will eventually be overthrown and replaced, not because they are false but because they are incomplete, provisional truths that serve until deeper truths can be discovered. He attends meetings of the new scientific academies, listens to debates about chemistry and electricity, subjects that were barely understood in his youth, and he realizes that the pace of discovery is accelerating, that each generation builds more quickly upon the work of the previous one, and that he is witnessing the beginning of an exponential curve of knowledge that will eventually transform the world beyond all recognition. During one of these meetings, he encounters Lavoisier, the chemist who is revolutionizing the understanding of matter and combustion, and they speak briefly about the nature of elements and compounds, and Newton finds himself envying this man his passion and certainty, his ability to pursue knowledge within the normal span of a human life, with colleagues and recognition and the satisfaction of seeing his work acknowledged. After Lavoisier is executed during the Terror in 1794, Newton stands once again at a grave, once again mourning someone who should have outlived him, and the weight of his immortality presses down upon him like a physical burden. The 19th century arrives, and with it comes a new generation of thinkers who begin to challenge and extend Newton's vision of the universe. He reads the work of Young and Fresnel on the wave theory of light, and he feels a pang of regret, for he had championed the corpuscular theory, had insisted light was composed of particles, and now the evidence seems to favor waves. Newton, who had always been so certain, so unyielding in his convictions, must now confront the possibility that he was wrong, or at least incomplete, and this humility does not come easily. He travels to Scotland in the 1820s, to the laboratories where Maxwell will later work, and he studies electricity and magnetism with the intensity of a student, trying to understand these new forces that seem to operate beyond the scope of his original laws. In the 1840s, he visits the Great Exhibition in London, walking among the wonders of industry and invention, and he sees his own legacy transformed into technology, into progress, into a world that is accelerating beyond anything he could have imagined in 1727. The Crystal Palace rises before him like a cathedral of glass and iron, and he wanders through its vast halls observing machines from every corner of the empire, devices that spin and weave and print and calculate, all of them obeying the laws of motion he had written down more than a century ago. And yet, amidst all this change, Newton remains fundamentally alone. He cannot form lasting relationships, cannot allow anyone to know his true nature, and so he drifts through the decades in isolation, a ghost haunting the very civilization his ideas helped to create. He thinks often of his childhood, of the farm in Woolsthorpe, of the apple orchard where, in 1666, he had first intuited the principle of universal gravitation. That moment of insight, that sudden understanding that the same force pulling fruit to earth also held the moon in its orbit, it had been the defining revelation of his life. And now, nearly 2 centuries later, it feels both infinitely distant and impossibly close, as if it happened to someone else entirely, some other Newton in some other lifetime. He purchases the Woolsthorpe estate when it comes up for sale in 1852, using wealth he has accumulated through careful investments and the occasional application of his mathematical genius to financial markets, and he restores the house and gardens to their 17th century appearance, creating a shrine to his own past, a place where he can walk among memories made solid. He plants new apple trees descended from the original, and he sits beneath them on summer afternoons, reading the scientific journals of the day and marveling at how far knowledge has progressed, how much has been discovered since he first sat in this same orchard as a young man of 23, home from Cambridge during the plague, his mind ablaze with ideas about motion and gravity and the nature of light. He remembers the excitement of those years, the sense of standing on the threshold of great discoveries, and he wonders if he will ever feel that excitement again, or if immortality has dulled his capacity for wonder, has transformed the thrill of discovery into mere observation, interesting but no longer transformative. But then he reads about new phenomena, about the conservation of energy and the laws of thermodynamics, about the work being done on the atomic theory of matter, and he feels the old excitement stirring, feels his mind engaging with problems as it always has, and he realizes that curiosity, at least, has not abandoned him, that this fundamental drive to understand remains as strong as ever, perhaps the only part of him that has not changed across the long centuries of his existence. In 1859, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, and Newton reads it with a mixture of wonder and unease. He had always believed in a divine creator, in a universe designed with purpose and precision, and now here is a theory that suggests life itself operates through blind variation and selection, through mechanisms as impersonal as gravity. Newton, who had spent years writing theological treatises, who had calculated biblical chronologies and interpreted prophecies, must now reconcile this new understanding of life's history with his own deeply held convictions. He does not reject Darwin outright, for he has learned, over the long years, that nature reveals itself in layers, that each generation sees deeper into the structure of reality, and perhaps this too is part of the divine plan, this slow unveiling of truth through human inquiry. He remembers his own mistakes, his insistence on absolute space and absolute time, concepts that felt intuitively certain but that he knows, even now in the mid-19th century, may someday be challenged. And as the decades pass, as the Victorian era blooms into its full industrial grandeur, Newton becomes a wanderer in the truest sense, traveling across Europe, across the Americas, observing the expansion of human civilization with the detachment of an eternal outsider. He visits the laboratories of Faraday, stands in the back of lecture halls where the new physics is being forged, and he contributes anonymously to scientific journals, offering small corrections and insights that puzzle the editors who receive them, for they seem to come from someone with an impossibly deep understanding of the field's foundations. In 1872, he takes a steamship to America, crossing the Atlantic in a journey that would have been unthinkable in his youth, and he travels westward across the expanding nation, witnessing the construction of the transcontinental railroad, the settlement of territories, the displacement of indigenous peoples. He feels a deep disquiet at the violence and disruption he observes, at the way progress seems always to demand sacrifice from those with less power, and he wonders if the mathematical elegance of natural law has any counterpart in human affairs, or if society is forever condemned to operate through force and exploitation rather than harmony and reason. He spends several months among the Lakota people in the Dakota Territory, learning their language and customs, and he is struck by their understanding of time as circular rather than linear, their sense of the world as alive and interconnected rather than mechanistic and dead, and he recognizes in their worldview something he had lost, some connection to the sacred that his own mathematical precision had perhaps diminished. The turn of the 20th century brings with it revelations that shake the very foundations Newton had laid. In 1905, Einstein publishes his papers on special relativity, and Newton, now living quietly in Switzerland under the name of a minor scholar, reads them with a sense of vertigo. The absolute space and absolute time he had assumed, the fixed stage upon which all motion occurred, these are shown to be illusions, conveniences, not fundamental truths. Space and time are interwoven, malleable, dependent on the observer's motion, and light itself, that phenomenon Newton had studied so intensely, becomes the one absolute constant in a relative universe. He should feel devastated, should feel that his life's work has been overturned, but instead he feels a strange exhilaration, for this is what he had always sought: deeper truth, more accurate description, a closer approximation to the divine mathematics underlying reality. He arranges a meeting with Einstein, posing as an elderly enthusiast of physics, and they speak for hours in a small cafe in Bern. Newton asks careful questions, probes the logic of relativity, and Einstein, animated and joyful, explains how Newton's laws remain valid as approximations, how they work perfectly well at human scales and speeds, but must be revised when approaching the speed of light or the curvature of spacetime near massive objects. And Newton listens, nods, and feels a profound kinship with this young man who, like himself centuries before, has dared to reimagine the cosmos. He does not reveal his true identity, of course, cannot reveal it, but as they part, Einstein remarks that the old scholar seemed to understand the mathematics with unusual depth, seemed almost to have an intuitive grasp of the concepts that surpassed what one would expect from a casual student, and Newton walks away smiling, feeling less alone than he has in decades. In the years that follow, he reads everything Einstein publishes, follows the development of general relativity with intense fascination, and in 1919, when Eddington's eclipse observations confirmed the bending of starlight by the sun's gravity, Newton stands in a park in London reading the newspaper reports, and he feels a deep satisfaction, for the universe has spoken, has confirmed this new vision of gravity not as a force but as curvature, and he sees his own inverse square law as a special case, a beautiful approximation that emerges from the deeper truth of space-time geometry. The 20th century accelerates, time itself seeming to compress as technology and science advance at a pace Newton finds almost overwhelming. He witnesses the First World War, the mechanized slaughter that turns his beloved mathematics of ballistics into instruments of mass death, and he feels a deep sorrow, for he had always believed knowledge would lead humanity toward enlightenment, toward peace, And yet here is knowledge weaponized, turned against itself. He walks through the battlefields of the summer after the armistice, sees the mud and craters and endless rows of white crosses, and he understands with terrible clarity that the same rational mind that can calculate the orbit of a planet can calculate the trajectory of a shell, that science is neutral and humans are not, and that the responsibility for how knowledge is used lies not with the universe but with those who inhabit it. He retreats to America in the 1920s, to the deserts of New Mexico and Arizona, where he can observe the stars in isolation, where the night sky still looks much as it did in his youth, unchanging and infinite. And then comes quantum mechanics, that strange new physics that describes the atomic realm, and Newton, reading Heisenberg and Bohr and Schrödinger, encounters a universe that operates in ways fundamentally alien to his deterministic vision. Particles that behave like waves, certainties replaced by probabilities, the act of observation itself influencing the outcome. It is a reality that resists the clean, predictive equations he had championed, and yet the mathematics works, the experiments confirm it, and Newton must once again expand his understanding. He remembers his own work on optics, his experiments with prisms and lenses, and he wonders if he had glimpsed, even then, the dual nature of light that quantum mechanics now describes, wonders if there were hints in his own observations that he had missed or dismissed because they did not fit his corpuscular model. In the 1930s, he moves to England, drawn by reports of Eddington's work, and he attends lectures on cosmology, on the expanding universe discovered by Hubble, and he learns that the cosmos itself is not static as he had assumed, but dynamic, evolving, born from a singular moment of creation billions of years ago. The idea of a beginning to time itself troubles him deeply, for he had always conceived of time as infinite in both directions, eternal and uncreated, and now he must adjust his thinking once more, must accept that even time has a history, that the universe he had thought eternal is in fact finite in age, though perhaps infinite in extent. The Second World War erupts, and Newton, now living under yet another assumed identity, watches as the scientific community mobilizes for conflict. He hears rumors of a secret project in Los Alamos, and he travels there, manages to find work as a minor consultant on mathematical problems, and he witnesses the birth of the atomic age. When the bomb is tested in the Trinity explosion of July 1945, Newton stands among the observers, shielded behind dark glass, and he sees the flash that lights up the desert dawn, the mushroom cloud rising like a terrible flower, and he understands, with absolute clarity, that humanity has unlocked the very forces that bind matter itself. He thinks of Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, that simple, elegant relationship between energy and mass, and he sees it embodied in the fireball before him, and he feels a grief so profound it threatens to overwhelm him. This is his legacy too, he realizes, for without his laws of motion, without the foundation he laid, none of this could have been achieved. The mathematics of destruction rests upon the mathematics of the heavens, and Newton must carry this knowledge forward, must witness Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the Cold War that follows, must watch as the species he belongs to gains the power to annihilate itself. In the decades after the war, he becomes increasingly reclusive, spending years at a time in remote locations, in the mountains of Tibet, in the forests of Scandinavia, trying to make sense of what humanity has become. He corresponds with physicists and philosophers under various pseudonyms, And there are those who suspect that the mysterious letters they receive, filled with insights that seem to bridge centuries of thought, come from a single source. But no one can prove it, and Newton remains hidden. He meets Oppenheimer once, at a small gathering of scientists in 1952, and they speak briefly about the moral weight of discovery, and Oppenheimer quotes the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." And Newton recognizes in the man's haunted eyes something of his own burden, the knowledge that what we create can escape our control, can be used in ways we never intended, and that the scientist's responsibility does not end with publication, but extends into all the futures that flow from the work. He leaves that conversation feeling deeply shaken, and for several years afterward he abandons physics entirely, studying instead philosophy and ethics, trying to understand if there are principles that could guide the application of knowledge, rules as rigorous as the laws of motion but operating in the moral rather than physical domain. The 1960s arrive, and with them comes the space age, and Newton, watching the Apollo launches on television in a small apartment in Florida, feels tears on his face for the first time in decades. These are his laws, his equations, that guide the rockets beyond Earth's atmosphere, that calculate the trajectories and orbits, that allow humans to walk upon the moon itself. He had gazed at the moon through his telescope in the 1660s, had mapped its surface and calculated its motion, and now, 3 centuries later, footprints mark that ancient dust. He travels to Cape Canaveral, stands among the crowds watching the Saturn V rise on pillars of flame, and he feels a joy so pure it almost justifies the long centuries of solitude. This is what his work was for. He thinks, not for weapons, not for destruction, but for this, for humanity reaching outward, for the exploration of the cosmos he had loved so deeply. In the 1970s and 80s, he immerses himself in the new developments in physics, string theory, quantum field theory, the search for a unified understanding of all forces. He reads Hawking's work on black holes, on the thermodynamics of space-time itself, and he marvels at how far the science has come, how the mathematics he pioneered has blossomed into structures of unimaginable complexity. He takes a position as a visiting professor at Cambridge, his old university, and he walks the same halls he walked as a young man, though now they are filled with computers and modern equipment, and no one recognizes him, of course, for he is simply another aging scholar among many. He lectures occasionally, always on historical topics, on the development of classical mechanics, and his students find him oddly passionate about Newton's original work, as if he had known the man personally, as if the derivation of the inverse square law from Kepler's third law was not just a historical curiosity, but a living memory. One bright student approaches him after class and asks if he thinks Newton would be pleased with how physics has developed, and Newton pauses, considers the question seriously, and finally says that he believes Newton would be humbled and amazed, would recognize that he had glimpsed only the beginning of a much longer story, and would be grateful to have played his small part in it. The student thanks him and walks away, never knowing she has just received Newton's own assessment of his legacy, delivered in the third person, disguised as speculation. The turn of the millennium finds Newton in Japan, drawn by the country's blend of ancient tradition and cutting-edge technology. He studies quantum computing and artificial intelligence, trying to understand these new frontiers of knowledge, and he sees in them the continuation of the same quest he began so long ago, the quest to understand the rules underlying reality, to find the algorithms by which the universe operates. He has watched scientific revolutions come and go, has seen his own theories refined and superseded, and he has learned a humility that eluded him in his mortal years. He is no longer the jealous, competitive Newton who fought with Hooke over credit for the inverse square law, who engaged in bitter priority disputes with Leibniz over calculus. 3 centuries of existence have taught him that knowledge is collective, that each generation builds upon the last, and that his own contributions, however foundational, were always part of a larger tapestry. In the early 2000s, he returns to England, to the farm in Woolsthorpe where he was born, and he walks through the orchard, now preserved as a historical site, and he sees the descendant of his famous apple tree, still standing, still bearing fruit. He plucks an apple, feels its weight in his palm, and he smiles at the memory of that young man he once was, brilliant and isolated, who saw in the fall of this simple fruit the key to the heavens. The tourists around him take photographs, read plaques about Newton's life and discoveries, and Newton himself stands among them, anonymous and ageless, a living ghost haunting his own history. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, tugs at her father's sleeve and asks if the apple really fell on Newton's head, and the father laughs and explains that it's probably a myth, that Newton likely just observed apples falling and began to think about why they fall down rather than up, and Newton, listening, nods in silent agreement, for the truth is both simpler and more profound than the legend. A moment of quiet observation rather than dramatic impact, though the impact on human understanding was dramatic enough. He thinks about leaving a note, about revealing himself to the world, about the validation it might bring to feel recognized again, to step out of the shadows and claim his place. But he knows this impulse is vanity, the old competitive instinct reasserting itself, and he resists it, choosing instead to remain unknown, to let the legend of Newton stand separate from the reality of the man who still walks the earth. The 2010s bring new challenges and new wonders. Newton watches as the Higgs boson is discovered at CERN, as gravitational waves are detected for the first time, confirming predictions made by Einstein a century before. He reads about exoplanets, thousands of worlds orbiting distant stars, and he remembers his own speculations about other solar systems, about the possibility of infinite worlds beyond our own. He had written about this in his Principia, had suggested that the fixed stars might themselves be suns with their own retinue of planets, and now, in the 21st century, this intuition is confirmed by observation, by the dimming of starlight as planets transit across their parent stars, by the subtle wobbles induced by planetary gravity. He travels frequently now, restless in a way he has never been before, visiting the great observatories and research institutions, the particle accelerators and space agencies, always watching, always learning. He has lived through the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Atomic Age, the Information Age, and he wonders what comes next, what new transformation awaits. He remembers his theological studies, his attempts to decode prophecy and revelation, and he wonders if his immortality itself is a kind of prophecy, a sign of something he cannot yet understand. In quiet moments, he still prays, still seeks the presence of the divine in the mathematical structures of reality, and though his understanding of God has evolved over the centuries, becoming less anthropomorphic, more abstract, He has never lost his sense of the sacred, his belief that the universe is more than mere matter in motion. He attends a lecture by a young cosmologist who speaks about the ultimate fate of the universe, about heat death and the gradual dissipation of all structure into equilibrium, and Newton finds himself troubled by this vision of a cosmos that winds down like a clockwork mechanism, eventually falling silent and still. He raises his hand during the question period and asks if there might be processes we don't yet understand, ways in which order could emerge from disorder, cycles that operate on timescales beyond our current comprehension, and the cosmologist smiles and acknowledges that our understanding is incomplete, that dark energy and dark matter suggest we're missing major pieces of the puzzle, and Newton nods, satisfied that uncertainty still reigns, that the quest for knowledge is not yet finished. By 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic sweeps across the globe, and Newton, who had lived through the plague years of 1665 and 1666, who had fled Cambridge for Woolsthorpe and there, in isolation, had his most productive period, his annus mirabilis, watches as the world locks down and scientists race to develop vaccines. He sees the same patterns: fear, quarantine, the disruption of normal life, but also the acceleration of certain kinds of work, the creativity born of isolation. He volunteers at hospitals, uses his knowledge to assist in small ways, and he is struck by how much medicine has advanced, how the germ theory of disease, still unknown in his mortal lifetime, has led to such profound improvements in human welfare. He remembers the friends he lost to smallpox and consumption, the suffering that was simply accepted as inevitable, and he feels gratitude for the progress that has been made, even as he mourns the losses this new plague brings. The development of mRNA vaccines astonishes him, the speed at which molecular biology has advanced, the ability to sequence the virus's genome and design a countermeasure within months, and he sees in this achievement the fulfillment of the scientific method he helped to establish, the cycle of observation and hypothesis and experiment operating at unprecedented speed and scale. In the years that follow, he watches as artificial intelligence develops at an exponential pace, as machine learning systems begin to make discoveries in mathematics and physics that surprise even their creators. He wonders if these machines, these thinking engines, are the next step in the evolution of intelligence, if they will someday surpass human understanding as thoroughly as human understanding surpassed the instincts of animals. And he wonders too if they might solve the mystery of his own existence, might find the pattern or principle that has allowed him to live for nearly 3 centuries, might explain what he himself cannot. He feeds his own observations about his condition into a medical AI system, anonymously, presenting them as a hypothetical case, and the system returns a diagnosis of impossible physiology, data likely corrupted or fabricated. And Newton laughs quietly at this, at the machine's refusal to accept what it cannot explain, so like his own younger self who would have dismissed such a case as fraud or fantasy. In 2024, Newton stands on a beach in California, watching the sun set over the Pacific, and he thinks about time, about the nature of his own impossible journey. He is 381 years old now, or perhaps he is still 84, frozen at the moment he should have died. He has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the transformation of the Earth's surface through industrialization and urbanization, the population explosion that has brought humanity to 8 billion souls. He has seen his own laws used to build bridges and skyscrapers, to launch satellites and space probes, to predict eclipses and tides. And he has seen those same laws refined, contextualized, understood as approximations valid within certain domains but not universal, not absolute. This does not diminish them, he knows now. It only places them within a larger framework, a deeper truth. He thinks about the mistakes he made, the years wasted on alchemy and biblical chronology, the feuds and resentments that consumed so much of his energy. And yet those mistakes too were part of his journey, part of the process by which he came to understand himself and the world. He wonders if, had he died in 1727 as he should have, his legacy would be different, if the clarity of a life completed, a story with an ending, would have served humanity better than this strange prolongation. But then he remembers the moon landing, the joy he felt watching humans walk on lunar soil, and he thinks perhaps there is purpose in his continued existence. Perhaps he is meant to witness the fruits of the seeds he planted. The waves roll in, constant and rhythmic, and he thinks about oscillation, about the pendulums he studied in his youth, and he realizes that his own existence has a pendular quality, swinging between engagement with the world and withdrawal from it, between hope for humanity's future and disquiet its capacity for violence and cruelty. And he wonders if he will ever find equilibrium, or if he is condemned to this oscillation for as long as his immortality persists. The mid-2020s see breakthroughs in quantum computing and fusion energy, and Newton, attending conferences under various academic credentials, listens to talks that would have seemed like magic to his younger self. He remembers the candles and fireplaces that lit his world in the 17th century, the horse-drawn carriages, the absence of electricity and engines, and he marvels at the transformation that has occurred. But he also sees continuity, sees that the same curiosity that drove him to experiment with prisms and pendulums, to calculate orbits and derive laws, is still alive in these modern researchers, still pushing at the boundaries of the known. He gives an anonymous donation to Cambridge University, funding a scholarship for students studying the history and philosophy of science, and in the documentation he includes a quote from his younger self, the famous line about standing on the shoulders of giants. The irony is not lost on him. He is that giant now, or rather the world believes he is long dead, a historical figure whose shoulders support the edifice of modern physics. And yet here he stands, very much alive, still learning, still questioning, still filled with the same burning desire to understand that animated him in his youth. He wonders if he will live forever, if there is any limit to this strange condition, or if perhaps one day he will simply choose to stop, to let go of the world and pass into whatever comes after. But he is not ready for that, not yet, for there is still so much to see, so much to learn. He attends a symposium on the nature of time, listens to physicists debate whether time is fundamental or emergent, whether the flow of time is real or illusory, and he thinks about his own experience of 3 centuries, about whether the persistence of memory creates continuity of self or whether he has been many different Newtons, each replacing the last in an unbroken chain of transformation. The discussions grow abstract, mathematical, and Newton follows the equations with ease, contributes a question that startles the panel with its depth, and afterward a young researcher approaches him and asks if they've met before, says there's something familiar about the way he thinks, and Newton smiles and says perhaps they share a common influence, some teacher or text that shaped them both, and the conversation ends there. another near revelation deflected. By 2026, as we near the present moment, Newton has become aware of a new frontier, the merger of biology and technology, the enhancement of human cognition through neural interfaces, the possibility of uploading consciousness into digital substrates. He attends seminars on transhumanism, on the ethics of life extension and artificial enhancement, and he listens to people debate whether humans should use technology to transcend their biological limits. And he thinks, with a bitter irony, that he has been transhuman for 3 centuries, has lived beyond all natural limits without choosing to, without understanding how, and the loneliness of it has been profound. He wonders if the technologies these futurists dream of will create others like him, immortals drifting through time, or if they will create something different, a collective immortality, a shared persistence that allows for community rather than isolation. He writes, in a journal he keeps but shows to no one, that immortality without connection is not a blessing but a curse, that the meaning of life is found in relationships, in the communities we build and the love we share, and that to live forever alone is to exist outside of life itself, to become a pure observer, detached from the human story. And yet he continues to watch and learn and move through the world, because what else can he do? Because stopping is not within his power, because the same force that has sustained him for 300 years continues to sustain him still, and he does not know how to resist it. He thinks about the people he has loved over the centuries, the few friends he allowed himself before the weight of deception became too great, and he remembers their faces, their voices, the way they moved through the world with the precious urgency of mortals who knew their time was limited. He envies them that urgency, that sense of purpose born from finitude, and he wonders if immortality has robbed him of something essential, some quality of being that only exists in the shadow of death. But then he reads about a new discovery, a pulsar whose rotation can be measured with exquisite precision, and his mind immediately begins calculating, working through the implications for tests of general relativity, and he realizes that his curiosity remains undimmed, that the part of him that wants to understand the universe has not been diminished by 3 centuries of existence, and perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this is what he was meant to preserve. In the spring of 2026, Newton visits the laboratories where quantum gravity is being studied, where physicists are trying to reconcile Einstein's general relativity with quantum mechanics, trying to find the theory of everything that will unite all forces and all particles into a single coherent framework. He listens to discussions of string theory and loop quantum gravity, of higher dimensions and emergent space-time, and he feels a familiar excitement, the same thrill he felt as a young man discovering calculus, developing the mathematics of change and motion. He realizes that he has lived long enough to see the quest he began come full circle, to see science approaching a complete description of physical reality, and he wonders if, when that theory is finally found, if it will include an explanation for his own existence, for the anomaly he represents. Perhaps there are loopholes in the laws of nature, hidden pathways that allow for exceptions, for miracles, or perhaps his immortality is itself natural, a rare configuration of matter and energy that occurs with infinitesimal probability, but is not impossible. He does not know, may never know, and he has learned to live with uncertainty, to accept that some questions may not have answers, or at least not answers accessible to him. In the evenings, he walks through cities transformed by technology, by the glow of screens and the hum of electric infrastructure, and he feels both connected and disconnected, part of the human story and yet forever apart from it, a witness to 3 centuries of change who cannot share his full perspective with anyone. He passes a street musician playing a violin, and the music stops him, holds him in place, for it is a Bach partita, the same piece he heard performed in Leipzig in 1740, and the continuity of it, the way this music has survived across centuries, passed from hand to hand, from generation to generation, gives him a strange comfort. Perhaps he too is like a piece of music, a theme that persists while everything around it changes, and perhaps his purpose is simply to endure, to maintain continuity, to remember what others have forgotten. He places a generous sum in the musician's case and walks on, and the music follows him down the street, weaving through the sounds of traffic and conversation, a thread of beauty connecting past to present. As the year 2026 unfolds, Newton finds himself drawn to the discussions about artificial general intelligence, about the possibility that machines might soon achieve human-level reasoning and beyond. He reads papers on alignment and safety, on the challenges of ensuring that powerful AI systems remain beneficial to humanity, and he sees parallels to the conversations that occurred in the 1940s about atomic weapons, about technologies that could either elevate or destroy civilization. He thinks about his own role in history, about how the calculus he invented enabled so much of modern science and engineering, and he wonders if he bears responsibility for both the good and the ill that has flowed from that invention. But he concludes, as he has many times before, that knowledge itself is neutral, that it is the application of knowledge that carries moral weight, and that the pursuit of truth is always worthwhile, even when the truths discovered are dangerous. He remembers a conversation he had with Leibniz, back when they were still cordial, before the priority dispute over calculus turned them into enemies, and Leibniz had spoken about the principle of sufficient reason, about the idea that everything must have an explanation, a cause, a reason for being as it is rather than otherwise. And Newton wonders what the sufficient reason is for his own continued existence, what purpose it serves, what meaning it carries. He has no answer, only the continuation itself, only the flow of days and years and decades that has become his reality. He attends a talk by a philosopher of mind who argues that consciousness might be substrate independent, that it's the pattern rather than the material that matters, and Newton finds this idea both exciting and troubling, for if consciousness is pattern, then perhaps he has not been the same person across 3 centuries. Perhaps the Newton of 1727 and the Newton of 2026 are as different as 2 separate individuals, connected only by memory and the illusion of continuity. And yet he feels continuous, feels that there is a thread of identity running through all the changes, and he wonders which feeling is more reliable, the philosophical argument or the subjective experience. In the autumn of 2026, Newton travels to Geneva, to the CERN laboratory, and he stands in the tunnels of the Large Hadron Collider, that vast machine designed to smash particles together at speeds approaching that of light, and he feels a profound awe. This is the culmination of the journey he began, the quest to understand matter at its most fundamental level, and here, in these tunnels buried beneath the French-Swiss border, that quest continues with an intensity and precision he could never have imagined. He speaks with physicists from around the world, young researchers who have devoted their lives to understanding quarks and leptons, bosons and fermions, the particle zoo that constitutes physical reality. And he sees in them the same passion he once felt, the same willingness to sacrifice comfort and recognition in pursuit of knowledge, and he feels a kinship with them even as he hides his true identity, even as he pretends to be merely an interested visitor, an elderly man with a fondness for physics. He wonders what these young scientists would think if they knew they were speaking with Isaac Newton, if they knew that the man whose equations they studied in their first year of university was standing before them, alive and listening. Would they believe it, or would they think him mad, a charlatan claiming an impossible identity? He has learned, over the centuries, that the truth of his existence is too strange for most to accept, and so he keeps it hidden, keeps himself hidden, and he has become very good at this, at being invisible, at moving through the world without leaving traces. One of the physicists, a woman from India working on supersymmetry, shows him data from recent collisions, points out anomalies that might hint at new particles, and she speaks with such enthusiasm, such pure joy in the process of discovery, that Newton feels a wave of emotion wash over him. This is why he has endured, he thinks, to witness moments like this, to see the human drive to understand persist across centuries, to know that the work he began will continue long after he is gone, whenever that might be. He thanks her for the tour, shakes her hand, and as he does he has the strangest impulse to tell her everything, to reveal who he is and what he has seen. But he suppresses it, smiles instead, and says simply that he hopes her work bears fruit, that she finds what she's looking for. As 2026 draws toward its close, Newton finds himself thinking more and more about the future, about where humanity is headed and what role, if any, he might play in that journey. He has been a passive observer for so long, contributing only anonymously, never revealing his true self, and he wonders if this is the right approach, if perhaps he should emerge from the shadows, should offer his perspective, his 3 centuries of accumulated wisdom. But he knows the chaos this would cause, the skepticism and the wonder, the disruption it would bring to the scientific community and to his own carefully maintained privacy. And so he remains hidden, watching as plans are made for missions to Mars, for bases on the Moon, for the exploration of the solar system and beyond. He reads proposals for interstellar probes, for generation ships that would travel for centuries to reach distant stars, and he thinks about the irony of it, humanity dreaming of immortality through the persistence of the species across cosmic time, while he himself has achieved a kind of immortality through the persistence of a single body across historical time. He wonders if he will live to see humans settle other worlds, if his immortality will extend long enough for him to witness the fulfillment of the dreams he can see forming now. He hopes so, hopes that he will stand on the surface of Mars one day, or gaze at Earth from a lunar settlement, and see the cosmos his laws described filled with human presence. He imagines walking on the red sands of Mars, looking up at the 2 small moons racing across the sky, and he remembers calculating their orbits from Kepler's observations, remembers deriving the mathematical relationships that govern all orbital motion, and he wonders if he will feel vindication or simply wonder, if the reality of standing on another world will fulfill some deep need or reveal new depths of longing. He has learned not to expect satisfaction from achievement, for each answer leads to new questions, each horizon reached reveals another beyond it, and perhaps this endless progression is the true nature of existence, the pattern that his own immortality exemplifies in personal form. And so we arrive at the present moment, at the end of 2026 and the beginning of 2027, with Isaac Newton still alive, still moving through the world like a quiet shadow, still learning, still watching, still filled with wonder at the universe he helped to explain. He is older than nations, older than the scientific method itself, a relic of the 17th century inhabiting the 21st, and yet he does not feel ancient. He feels, in many ways, perpetually young, perpetually curious, perpetually uncertain about the nature of reality and his place within it. The cosmos he mapped with such care continues to expand around him, galaxies receding into the darkness, stars being born and dying, planets coalescing from dust, and perhaps, somewhere out there, other intelligences looking up at their own skies and wondering the same questions he once wondered. He thinks about the apple, about gravity, about the simple observation that sparked a revolution in human understanding, and he realizes that the journey is never complete, that each answer generates new questions, that the pursuit of knowledge is infinite as the universe itself. And as the years continue to unfold, as technology advances and humanity reaches further into space and deeper into the quantum realm, Newton will be there, watching, learning, carrying with him the memories of 3 centuries, the weight of his achievements and his failures, the loneliness of his immortality and the joy of witnessing human progress. He will remain, as he has always been, a seeker of truth, a servant of knowledge, a man out of time who has somehow become timeless, drifting forward through history toward a future he cannot predict but can only greet with the same curiosity and wonder that defined his first 84 years, and all the years since, and all the years yet to come. On a clear January night in 2027, he stands in a field far from city lights, telescope beside him as it was 360 years ago, and he looks up at the stars, at the same constellations that shone over Woolsthorpe and Cambridge and London, and he whispers a prayer of gratitude, not for immortality itself, but for the chance to witness the slow unfolding of understanding, the human journey from ignorance toward knowledge that continues still, that will continue long after he is gone. If he is ever gone, and in this moment of connection to something larger than himself, to the great project of human inquiry that spans generations and centuries and perhaps millennia to come, Isaac Newton finds a peace that has eluded him for 300 years, finds that he is not separate from the story but part of it, not a ghost haunting history, but a living participant in the eternal quest to comprehend the cosmos. And the stars shine down with the same indifferent beauty they always have, silent and distant and yet somehow intimate, known through mathematics and observation, connected to him through the invisible threads of gravity that bind all things, holding the universe together in its vast and elegant dance. And time continues, flowing forward like a river toward an ocean he cannot see, carrying him along in its current, and he surrenders to it, lets it take him where it will, into tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond, open to whatever revelations await, ready for the next discovery, the next transformation, the next chapter in a story that began with an apple falling and continues still, 3 centuries later, with no end in sight.